A single dad noticed deaf twins ignored by everyone, then signed hello. His little daughter, Lily, loved weekends because it meant spending more time with her dad. But it also meant that Mark had to juggle breakfast, laundry, and packing for their usual morning walk in the park. Despite the stress, Mark cherished these moments. They were their little escape from the busy hum of the city. The park was not far from their small apartment. It was one of those places where the air always felt fresher, where birds chirped freely, and where the laughter of children echoed through the tall oak trees. Mark liked walking slowly, letting Lily run ahead while keeping an eye on her. Today, as they walked along the winding path, Mark's attention was drawn to something unusual. By the edge of the playground, near a small wooden bench shaded by a maple tree, sat two young children. They were twins, a boy and a girl, who looked to be about 6 or 7 years old. Both were dressed neatly in bright clothes, and their small hands clutched a simple wooden toy that seemed worn from constant use. Mark noticed immediately that the children were not playing with anyone else, and more strikingly, no one else seemed to notice them. Other parents were chatting with each other or keeping an eye on their own kids, but the twins were left completely alone. There was something in the way the twins sat that caught Mark's attention. They were quiet, almost withdrawn, their eyes scanning the playground but not really joining in. Their expressions were calm, but a subtle sadness lingered. Most children their age would have been running, laughing, or shouting for attention. These two seemed almost invisible, even in a place filled with energy and noise. Mark felt a tug at his heart. He knelt down slightly to speak to Lily, making sure she was close. "Hey, sweetie, see those kids?" he asked softly. Lily looked where he was pointing. Her eyes followed the twins' movements, and she noticed the same quiet that Mark had. "They're not playing with anyone," she said. Her voice was small, as if she had just realized something important. Mark nodded. "Yeah, it seems like they're all alone." He watched for a few more moments, curious and concerned. A small part of him wondered why no one was interacting with them. Children were usually quick to include anyone who looked lonely, but here, the twins remained untouched. Mark noticed a few other kids glance their way, then quickly run off, distracted by swings, slides, or the laughter of friends. Even parents passing by didn't stop. They offered polite smiles or casual nods, but no one approached. The twins, for their part, didn't seem sad or upset. They had each other, and their attention was on the toy they shared. But there was a stillness in their world that felt unusual in such a lively place. Mark studied them quietly, trying to understand what made them different. Was it shyness? Were they new to the park and didn't know anyone? Or was there something else? Mark's mind wandered back to his own childhood. He remembered how it felt to be left out at school sometimes, to sit on the sidelines while others laughed and played. He remembered the ache in his chest, the longing to be noticed. Looking at these children, he felt that familiar twinge again. It was like a quiet call for attention that didn't come in the form of words or loud gestures. It was subtle, but it was there. Lily tugged gently at his sleeve. "Daddy, should we go say hi?" she asked, her voice full of innocence and curiosity. Mark smiled at her. "Let's just watch them for a moment," he replied. He didn't want to scare them or rush them into a conversation. Sometimes, children needed time to feel safe before they could open up to strangers, even friendly ones. As they stood there, Mark noticed something else. The twins were communicating with each other, but not in words. Their hands moved in small, deliberate gestures, and they exchanged looks that carried meaning. It was clear they understood each other perfectly, even if no one else could. Mark leaned slightly closer to Lily, whispering, "Look at their hands." "They're talking to each other in their own way." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? How?" she asked. Mark shrugged. "I'm not sure yet, sweetie, but it's special, isn't it?" For the next few minutes, Mark and Lily continued to watch from a respectful distance. He noticed the children's eyes light up occasionally when they laughed together, small smiles forming on their faces. Even though the twins were alone, they had each other, and there was a quiet joy in that companionship. Mark felt both admiration and sadness. He admired their bond, but he couldn't shake the thought that it wasn't fair they were ignored by everyone else. Mark knew he couldn't leave it at that. He had spent years raising Lily and learning how important it was to notice the small things in life, the little struggles, the little joys. Sometimes, a kind word or a small gesture could make a huge difference. And these children, they were invisible to the world but not to him. He wanted to do something, even if it was just a small start. After a few more moments of observation, Mark decided to slowly approach the twins. He motioned for Lily to stay close by and took careful steps toward the bench. He didn't want to rush them or make them uncomfortable. As he came closer, he smiled warmly, keeping his hands relaxed and visible. The twins noticed him but didn't move. They simply watched, their small faces curious but cautious. Mark stopped a few feet away, kneeling slightly to be at their level. "Hi there," he said gently. "My name is Mark and this is my daughter Lily. We just came to the park to play. Mind if we sit here for a bit?" The twins tilted their heads slightly, observing him. They didn't respond with words, but Mark noticed their subtle hand movements again, small gestures that seemed almost deliberate. He didn't want to push too hard. Instead, he just smiled and waited, giving them space to decide if they wanted to interact. Lily stepped a little closer to the twins, offering a small toy from her bag, a gesture of friendship. The twins glanced at her and then back at the toy. One of them reached out slowly, taking it with a small, hesitant smile. Mark felt a sense of relief and quiet happiness. This was a start. As Mark sat down on a nearby bench, he realized that sometimes life was about noticing what others overlooked. The twins were not loud or demanding attention, but that didn't make them any less important. And in that quiet, sunny park, he made a silent promise to himself. He would find a way to reach these children, to make sure they felt seen and heard, even if the rest of the world ignored them. Hours passed as Mark and Lily stayed nearby, watching the twins play and communicating in their own silent language. Mark took mental notes, observing their patterns, their gestures, and the ways they reacted to small interactions. Every tiny smile, every little movement seemed precious. He knew he was witnessing something rare, a connection between two children who had found a world of their own, and who might just need someone patient and kind to step into it. By the time the afternoon sun began to dip behind the trees, Mark knew he couldn't just walk away and leave the twins alone again. He had felt a spark, a quiet connection, and he needed to explore it further. But for now he stood, took Lily's hand and whispered, "Come on, sweetie. Let's go home. We'll come back next weekend, okay?" Lily nodded eagerly, sensing her dad's determination. As they walked away, Mark kept looking back at the twins, hoping they had noticed his smile. That day, as Mark returned home, he couldn't stop thinking about the twins. Something about them stayed in his mind, their quiet strength, their small gestures, the way they communicated without words. He realized that life often gave us small signs, quiet moments that asked us to pay attention, to care, to act. And this, he thought, was one of those moments. Mark didn't know yet how he would reach the twins or what he might learn from them. But one thing was clear. He would not ignore them, and he would not let the world's busyness make them invisible. A simple hello, he thought, could be the beginning of something extraordinary. The next Saturday, Mark felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness as he and Lily headed to the park. All week he had thought about the twins, wondering who they were, why no one played with them, and what he could do to connect. He had tried to remember every small detail from their last encounter, the way the twins held their toy, the gestures they made to each other, the expressions that passed silently between them. Mark knew he wanted to reach them, but he also understood the importance of patience. Lily skipped ahead, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Daddy, I can't wait to see them again," she said cheerfully. Mark smiled, feeling his own heart lighten at her excitement. He held her hand and walked a little slower, scanning the familiar paths as they approached the playground. When they arrived, the twins were there again, sitting in their usual spot on the wooden bench under the maple tree. They looked almost the same as last week, quietly playing with their worn wooden toy. But today, something felt different. Mark noticed a faint anticipation in their posture, a small curiosity in the way their eyes followed the other children around the park. It was as if they were expecting someone to notice them this time. Mark took a deep breath. He knelt down slightly to speak to Lily in a low voice. "Sweetie, remember to be gentle. Let's just watch them for a moment and see what they do." Lily nodded, her eyes shining with excitement and empathy. She understood in her small way that some friendships had to start slowly, carefully, and with respect. For several minutes they observed the twins. Mark noticed more details this time. The subtle ways they moved their hands, the quick glances they exchanged, and the small smiles that appeared when one of them made a tiny discovery with their toy. It was clear that these gestures were more than random movements. They were part of a language that Mark didn't yet understand. Mark felt a wave of curiosity mixed with concern. Why did the world ignore them? Other children were running around, laughing and shouting, but no one seemed to include the twins. Parents walked past with casual nods, but there was no effort to engage. Mark felt a growing sense of responsibility. These children were not broken, nor were they less than anyone else. They were simply unseen, and that was something he could not ignore. As they watched, a little boy ran past and tried to show the twins how to play with a small ball. The twins looked at him for a moment, then quietly went back to their toy. The boy shrugged and ran off to join his friends, and Mark noticed a flicker of sadness in the twins' eyes. They weren't upset, they were used to it, but the moment confirmed what Mark had suspected. They were different, and the world around them didn't always understand that difference. Mark decided it was time to do more than just observe. He wanted to reach them, to bridge the silence with kindness. He had spent the week thinking about the best way to connect, realizing that words might not work the same way they did with other children. He remembered seeing hand gestures and subtle movements, and a thought struck him. Perhaps the twins communicated in a way that others didn't recognize. Maybe, just maybe, if he tried to use gestures, they would understand him better. Mark had never learned sign language, but he had a few basic ideas from a book he once borrowed at the library. That morning, he had practiced a small greeting, trying to perfect it so that it would be simple, warm, and inviting. He knew that confidence mattered. Children could sense hesitation and uncertainty, and he didn't want to frighten them. He slowly walked toward the bench, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. Lily stayed close by, holding his hand tightly, sensing the importance of the moment. As he approached, the twins noticed him again. Their eyes followed his every step, and for the first time Mark felt a flicker of hope, a connection waiting to be made. He knelt down near the twins, smiling warmly. "Hello," he said softly, then repeated the word with his hands, attempting a simple sign he had practiced. One of the twins blinked and stared at his hands, trying to imitate the movement. Mark's heart skipped a beat. It worked. Even the smallest reaction meant a breakthrough. The twins exchanged a quick glance between themselves. The boy, slightly bolder, moved his hands again, trying to mimic what Mark had done. The girl followed suit, laughing softly at her brother's clumsy attempt. Mark laughed along quietly, keeping his voice gentle, and nodded encouragingly. He realized that patience and gentle encouragement were key. For the next hour, Mark sat nearby, slowly teaching the twins small signs: hello, friend, play, and thank you. Lily joined in, her small hands clumsy but enthusiastic, earning a giggle from the girl twin. Slowly, the twins responded, repeating the gestures with care and curiosity. It was not a full conversation yet, but it was the beginning of communication, a bridge forming between them and the outside world. Mark noticed more than just the gestures. He noticed the joy that came to the twins' faces when they realized someone wanted to communicate with them. He noticed the spark of recognition, the flicker of trust that appeared in their eyes. He realized that the silence surrounding them was not emptiness, it was potential, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Other parents and children began to notice too. Some smiled, curious about the interaction, while others continued their activities, unaware of the small miracle unfolding nearby. Mark didn't mind. This moment was not about recognition from strangers. It was about giving these children attention, respect, and friendship. As the afternoon wore on, Mark felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had experienced in a long time. Being a single dad had taught him responsibility and patience, but this was different. He was not just taking care of his daughter. He was helping children discover that the world could be a welcoming place, even when it seemed to ignore them. The twins, for their part, began to relax. They laughed more freely, their hands moving with confidence, and their smiles became more frequent. Mark noticed that even their body language had changed. Where they had once sat stiffly, they now leaned slightly forward, engaging with the small circle that had formed around them. Mark realized something important. The twins were not shy, broken, or unapproachable. They were simply living in a world that hadn't yet learned to see them, and today he had begun to change that. As the sun began to set, Mark knew it was time to leave. He stood up slowly, smiling at the twins. "We'll come back next week," he signed and spoke softly. The twins waved, mimicking the gesture, and Mark felt a surge of pride. He had connected with them in a way that words alone could not achieve. Walking back with Lily, Mark reflected on the day. The twins had taught him something without even realizing it. Sometimes, attention and patience could speak louder than words. Sometimes, a simple effort to notice someone could change a life. He thought about how many other children, adults, or even friends might be quietly struggling in ways that went unseen. And he made a silent promise. He would always try to notice, always try to care, and always try to reach out. That evening, as they prepared for dinner at home, Mark sat with Lily and talked quietly about the twins. "You know, sweetie," he said, "sometimes people need a little help to be seen, and today we helped them a bit." Lily nodded solemnly, understanding in her small way. "We made friends," she said simply. Mark smiled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Yes, he thought they had made friends, but more importantly, they had built trust. And trust, he knew, was the foundation for anything meaningful in life. Before going to bed, Mark took out his notebook and jotted down the small gestures, the signs, and the moments of connection. He wanted to remember everything, the little smiles, the attempts to mimic gestures, the laughter, and even the quiet pauses that spoke volumes. This was the beginning of a journey, he knew. A journey that would not only change the twins' lives but perhaps even change his own in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As he closed the notebook and tucked Lily into bed, Mark felt a quiet sense of hope. He knew that the next visit to the park would bring more learning, more connection, and more understanding. The world might still overlook these children, but he would not. And maybe, just maybe, one day the world would see them too. For Mark, that day had been more than a walk in the park. It had been the start of something extraordinary, a reminder that small gestures, patience, and kindness could open doors that words sometimes could not. And as he switched off the lights and whispered goodnight to Lily, he carried with him the quiet joy of knowing that he had made a difference, even if it was just one small hello at a time. The following Saturday, Mark woke up earlier than usual, feeling a quiet excitement that he could not quite explain. The week had felt longer than usual, each day carrying the memory of the twins and the small gestures that had connected them. He had thought about the children constantly, their quiet presence, their gestures, the way their eyes seemed to watch the world without being noticed. Mark realized that he wanted more than a brief interaction. He wanted to truly connect with them, to help them feel included and understood. Lily bounced out of bed, full of energy as usual. "Daddy, can we go see our friends now?" she asked eagerly. Mark chuckled and ruffled her hair. "Yes, sweetie, let's get ready." They packed a small bag with snacks, a few toys, and a notebook. Mark thought it might be helpful to record some gestures or signs they could use to communicate. He wanted to be patient, but he also wanted to learn from the children themselves. By the time they reached the park, the sun was high, casting warm rays over the playground. The twins were there again, sitting quietly on the same bench, the wooden toy resting between them. Mark noticed that today they seemed even more alert, as if they were expecting someone to come. Their eyes followed him and Lily, and he could see a flicker of curiosity, maybe even recognition. It warmed his heart. Mark knelt down a few feet away from the twins, smiling warmly. He had spent the week practicing some basic sign language. He wanted to make sure his gestures were clear, simple, and inviting. "Hello," he signed again, and this time the twins' reaction was immediate. The boy reached out his hands, trying to mimic the movement, and the girl followed. Both smiled softly, and Mark realized that this small exchange was the beginning of trust. Lily, standing nearby, watched carefully. She held a small toy in her hands, offering it as a gesture of friendship. The girl twin looked at it and hesitated, then accepted it with a shy smile. Mark noticed that these small acts, signs, gestures, and shared toys, were more meaningful than words. They were creating a language of kindness, a way to connect beyond what most people would notice. For the next hour, Mark focused on observing and learning. He tried to understand how the twins communicated with each other. Their gestures were subtle but precise, full of meaning. They laughed together, moved their hands in unison, and sometimes paused to exchange looks that seemed to hold entire sentences. Mark realized that he could learn from them just as much as they could learn from him. At one point, Mark decided to test a simple gesture he had learned from a book, "Friend." He signed it carefully, exaggerating the movement slightly to make it clear. The boy twin's eyes widened, and he repeated the gesture, glancing at his sister for confirmation. The girl twin followed, and soon all four of them were signing back and forth, a small but powerful connection forming. Mark felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was more than he had hoped for. It was communication, trust, and friendship all in one moment. Other parents and children began to notice the interaction. Some stopped to watch, curious about the gestures and the smiles exchanged between the children. But Mark didn't care about their attention. This moment was private, special, and sacred. He had learned that sometimes the most important connections were the ones that required patience, observation, and care. As the afternoon continued, Mark began to introduce small games that the twins could understand. Simple activities like rolling a ball back and forth, stacking blocks, or playing with the wooden toy became opportunities to communicate. Each action was accompanied by gestures, smiles, and occasional laughter. The twins responded enthusiastically, showing more confidence and joy with each passing minute. Mark realized that even small, playful interactions could teach trust and friendship. Lily watched her dad and the twins carefully, occasionally stepping in to demonstrate a gesture or offer a toy. She seemed to understand instinctively how to connect without pressure, without forcing interaction. Mark felt proud of her. He knew that she, too, was learning an important lesson about empathy, patience, and understanding. At one point, the boy twin hesitated, glancing around the park as if seeking reassurance. Mark noticed immediately. He leaned slightly closer and signed "Friend, safe." The boy's eyes lit up, and he mimicked the signs, smiling. The girl twin followed, and the three children exchanged small gestures that marked the beginning of a silent, shared conversation. Mark realized that trust was forming, trust that would grow stronger with each visit, each shared smile, and each gentle gesture. Hours passed quickly. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the playground. Mark knew it was time to leave, but he didn't want to go without leaving the twins with a sense of hope and anticipation. He signed, "See you next week," and spoke it softly, emphasizing the warmth in his voice. The twins waved back, and Mark noticed the excitement in their eyes. They had come to expect him, to anticipate his return, and that was a powerful feeling. Walking back with Lily, Mark reflected on the day. He realized that this simple act of noticing and reaching out had already begun to change something in the twins' lives. They were no longer invisible. They were acknowledged, understood, and accepted. Mark also realized that this connection was changing him, too. He had always known that patience and kindness were important, but now he saw their true power in action. That evening at home, Mark sat with Lily at the kitchen table. They practiced the small gestures and signs they had learned, laughing and copying the twins. Mark made notes in his notebook about the children's reactions, the gestures, and the small successes of the day. He wanted to remember every detail so that their connection could grow even stronger. Lily was fascinated, asking questions and imitating the gestures with delight. Mark thought about the journey ahead. He knew it would not be easy. Building trust and communication required time, patience, and care. But he also knew that the twins were worth it. They were intelligent, observant, and full of potential. They just needed someone to notice them, to give them a chance to communicate, and to show them that the world could be kind. Before bed, Mark reflected quietly. He realized that life often presented small opportunities to make a difference, and that these moments could be powerful if approached with patience and empathy. The twins had taught him something profound. That silence does not mean absence, and that communication can take many forms beyond words. Even the smallest gestures, when noticed and responded to with care, could open doors and change lives. As he tucked Lily into bed, Mark whispered softly, "Tomorrow is another day to learn, to care, and to connect." He felt a deep sense of fulfillment and hope. The twins had not only begun to communicate with him, but had also shown him the value of paying attention to the quiet, often overlooked moments in life. He drifted off to sleep thinking about the next visit, imagining the games they would play, the signs they would exchange, and the trust they would continue to build. For Mark, this was no longer just a casual Saturday in the park. It was a journey of friendship, understanding, and love. And for the twins, this journey was just beginning, with Mark and Lily by their side, ready to explore a world that had too long ignored them. The following Saturday, Mark woke with a sense of excitement that was hard to contain. The week had seemed longer than usual because every day he thought about the twins and their tiny gestures, the quiet world they lived in, and the small connection he had begun to build with them. He was no longer just a visitor in their lives. He was becoming part of their routine, a friendly presence they could rely on. Lily was already up, hopping around with energy and enthusiasm. "Daddy, can we go see our friends now?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Mark laughed softly and nodded. "Yes, sweetie, let's get ready. Don't forget your notebook and your toys, we might need them." Lily carefully packed her small backpack, placing a few of her favorite toys inside, as well as some colorful markers and a notebook. She understood in her own childlike way that today was another chance to connect, to learn, and to share. By the time they reached the park, the sun was shining brightly, casting warm golden light across the playground. The twins were already there, sitting on the familiar bench beneath the maple tree. This time, however, they seemed more aware, more alert, as if they were expecting Mark and Lily to arrive. Their eyes followed their usual paths with curiosity, and their small hands held the wooden toy with a subtle sense of anticipation. Mark smiled and knelt near the twins, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. He signed hello and spoke it softly. The boy twin's eyes lit up immediately, and the girl twin copied the gesture with a shy smile. Mark felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was no longer a tentative interaction. The twins had begun to trust him. Lily stepped forward, offering one of her small toys as a gesture of friendship. The girl twin hesitated, looking at her brother for reassurance, then accepted it with a quiet smile. Mark noticed the small but significant detail. They were beginning to respond to the gestures of others, not just each other. It was a breakthrough. Mark spent the next few minutes observing them. He had brought his notebook again and took careful notes on their gestures, expressions, and the ways they communicated silently. He wanted to understand them better, to learn their language, and to use it to build trust. The twins were patient and deliberate, and Mark realized that their attention to detail could teach him a lot about observing and connecting with others. After a while, Mark decided it was time to introduce a small game. He had brought a soft ball and began rolling it gently toward the twins, signing play. The boy twin hesitated for a moment, then reached out and rolled the ball back. The girl twin followed suit, and soon, all four of them were engaged in a simple game of rolling the ball, laughing quietly and signing play back and forth. Mark could see the joy on their faces, the excitement of being included in an activity that respected their way of communicating. As they played, other children began to notice the interaction. Some stopped to watch, curious about the gestures and the connection forming between Mark, Lily, and the twins. But Mark didn't mind the attention. He was focused entirely on the children in front of him. He understood that these small moments, filled with patience and care, were far more important than recognition from strangers. The twins began to experiment with new signs that Mark had taught them over the past weeks. They tried friend, happy, thank you, and play, often mixing the gestures with their own creative movements. Mark encouraged them, smiling and mimicking their attempts, making the learning process playful and enjoyable. Lily joined in as well, her small hands copying the signs and her laughter encouraging the twins. The park, for a brief moment, felt like a world where communication went beyond words and where understanding was built with gestures and patience. Mark noticed a subtle change in the twins' behavior. They were more relaxed, more willing to engage, and more confident in their movements. The boy twin began initiating small gestures toward Mark and Lily without hesitation, and the girl twin followed, laughing softly when she saw her brother's attempts. Mark realized that trust had grown deeper. The twins were no longer just responding, they were reaching out. At one point, the twins decided to show Mark something with their toy. The girl twin carefully placed a small wooden figure on the ground, then gestured toward Mark and Lily as if inviting them to join. Mark understood immediately. He signed thank you and nodded, then encouraged Lily to respond in the same way. Lily copied the gesture, and the twins smiled broadly, clearly pleased that their invitation had been understood. Mark felt a quiet pride in the progress they had made. As the afternoon continued, Mark introduced more small games and activities that encouraged cooperation and shared understanding. They stacked blocks together, created patterns on the ground with sticks and stones, and even practiced a small hello and goodbye routine that made the twins giggle. Each activity was more than just play. It was an opportunity to communicate, to teach trust, and to celebrate small successes. Mark also noticed that other parents and children were beginning to observe more closely. Some were curious about the way the twins communicated, and a few even began to mimic small gestures. Mark knew that this was a subtle but important shift. The twins were not invisible anymore. People were starting to notice, and perhaps even to understand that connection could take many forms beyond spoken words. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Mark realized it was time to leave. He signed "See you next week" and said it softly, emphasizing the warmth in his voice. The twins waved back energetically, and Mark noticed the excitement in their eyes. They had come to expect his visits, to anticipate the games, gestures, and laughter, and that was a powerful realization. Walking back home with Lily, Mark reflected on the day. The twins had grown more confident, more playful, and more willing to engage. They were learning that the world could be a safe and welcoming place, and he had played a part in that transformation. Mark also realized that the experience was changing him. He had learned patience, empathy, and the importance of noticing small details. He had seen firsthand how trust and understanding could be built slowly, through consistent care and attention. That evening, Mark and Lily practiced the signs they had learned, laughing as they tried to imitate the twins' movements. They wrote down notes in their notebook, recording gestures, reactions, and moments of joy. Mark wanted to remember every detail so that each visit could be even more meaningful. Lily listened carefully, her small fingers tracing the movements in the air as she copied the signs. Mark thought about the future. He knew that building trust and communication would take time, but he also knew that the twins were worth the effort. They were intelligent, observant, and full of potential. They just needed someone to notice them, to give them a chance to communicate, and to show them that the world could be kind and understanding. As he tucked Lily into bed that night, Mark reflected on the day's events. He realized that life often presented quiet opportunities to make a difference. The twins had taught him a profound lesson, that communication could take many forms, and that even the smallest gestures, when noticed and responded to with care, could have a transformative impact. Mark thought about the journey ahead with anticipation and hope. Each visit to the park was no longer just a casual Saturday outing. It was a chance to build connection, to teach empathy, and to help children discover that the world could be a welcoming place. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he was part of something meaningful, even if it started with simple gestures, shared laughter, and quiet patience. As he turned off the lights and whispered goodnight to Lily, Mark smiled to himself. The twins had begun to trust him, to play and communicate with him, and to experience the joy of being seen and understood. And Mark knew that with each visit, that trust and connection would grow stronger, building a foundation of friendship, understanding, and love that could last a lifetime. The park, once a place where the twins had been invisible, had become a space of discovery, joy, and acceptance. And for Mark, this journey was more than just teaching signs or playing games. It was about opening hearts, bridging worlds, and showing that small gestures, patience, and kindness could create extraordinary change. The following Saturday morning, Mark woke up with a sense of quiet, excitement, and anticipation. Over the past few weeks, each visit to the park had grown more meaningful, more joyful, and more connected. He had watched the twins bloom from quiet, withdrawn children into playful, trusting friends. Mark felt proud, not because of himself, but because he had been part of something gentle yet powerful, the start of a bond that gave these children a chance to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. Lily bounced around the kitchen, her backpack already packed, her notebook and toys ready for another day of learning and play. "Daddy, today's the best day," she exclaimed. Mark smiled and ruffled her hair. "I think it just might be, sweetie. Let's go make it even better for our friends." When they reached the park, the twins were waiting, their small bodies sitting on the familiar bench beneath the maple tree. This time, they seemed even more alert and expectant, their eyes searching the paths for Mark and Lily. The boy twins' fingers twitched slightly in excitement, and the girl twins' smile reached her eyes before she even acknowledged Mark. It was clear. They had come to expect these visits, to look forward to them, and to trust that Mark and Lily would return every week. Mark knelt near the twins and signed hello, speaking the words softly. Both children responded instantly, copying the gestures with growing confidence. Lily stepped forward, offering one of her favorite toys, and the girl twin accepted it eagerly, her small hands grasping it with delight. It was clear that the twins had begun to understand that interaction with others could be safe, joyful, and meaningful. For the next hour, Mark, Lily, and the twins engaged in a series of small games and activities that encouraged communication, teamwork, and trust. They rolled balls back and forth, stacked blocks together, and even practiced simple gestures that represented feelings like happy, thank you, and friend. Each activity was more than just play. It was a way to teach the twins that they could connect with the world, to show them that their silence did not mean isolation, and to help them realize that gestures, expressions, and shared moments could carry as much meaning as words. Mark noticed a significant change in the twins' behavior. The boy twin now initiated small gestures toward Mark and Lily without hesitation, often smiling as he signed. The girl twin mirrored him, laughing softly when he made a small mistake or exaggerated a gesture. The children were no longer passive observers. They were active participants, taking control of their interactions and creating their own shared language. Mark felt a deep sense of pride and fulfillment, knowing that these small steps were moments of empowerment for the twins. Other parents and children in the park began to take notice. Some stopped to watch the signs and gestures, curious about the connection forming. A few even tried to imitate the signs, laughing when they did it incorrectly. Mark smiled, realizing that the twins' story was already influencing the community, teaching empathy, patience, and the power of small, kind gestures. For the first time, the twins were visible to others, not just to Mark and Lily. As the afternoon continued, Mark decided to introduce a new activity, one that encouraged storytelling and imagination. Using the wooden toy and a few small props he had brought, he invited the twins to create a little story with their gestures and movements. At first, the children hesitated, unsure of how to express themselves. But with gentle encouragement, they began to use their hands and eyes to show the narrative, acting out simple scenarios with the wooden toy as the main character. Mark and Lily responded with gestures, smiles, and laughter, creating a rich, playful dialogue that transcended words. The twins' creativity flourished. They showed a growing understanding of cause and effect, collaboration and expression. The boy twin moved his hands to indicate the toy was hungry, and the girl twin added a gesture to show happy, building a small story together. Mark and Lily clapped their hands softly, cheering the twins on. For the first time, it felt like the twins were not just interacting, they were leading, guiding the play and teaching others how to understand their world. Mark realized something important in that moment. The twins were not just learning from him, he was learning from them. He was learning patience, observation, empathy, and the power of nonverbal communication. He had also learned the quiet strength of children who live in a world that often ignores them, yet who carry resilience, intelligence, and joy within themselves. As the afternoon sun began to lower, Mark knew it was time to leave. He signed "See you next week" and spoke it softly, watching as the twins waved enthusiastically in return. Their eyes shone with happiness, and for the first time, Mark saw a kind of anticipation in their expressions, a sense that they were looking forward to future encounters, to continued friendship, and to being part of a world that recognized them. Walking back with Lily, Mark reflected on the journey so far. The twins had grown in confidence, communication, and joy. They had learned that gestures could speak, that trust could be built slowly, and that being noticed could be life-changing. Mark also realized that these interactions had changed him. He had learned to slow down, observe, and appreciate small moments of connection that others might overlook. He had seen firsthand that kindness, patience, and understanding could transform lives. That evening, at home, Mark and Lily practiced the gestures and signs they had learned from the twins, reviewing each one carefully in their notebook. They laughed together as they tried to perfect some of the gestures, enjoying the process of learning and remembering. Mark wanted to ensure that every detail was captured so that their future visits could be even more meaningful and engaging. Mark thought about the future, realizing that their connection with the twins had already grown far beyond what he had imagined. The twins were no longer invisible. They had been seen, acknowledged, and included. Their world, which had been quiet and overlooked, was now filled with joy, friendship, and understanding. He felt grateful to have been part of that transformation and proud of the small but powerful difference he had made. In the days that followed, Mark noticed subtle changes in his own perspective. He began observing the world around him differently, noticing people who might be overlooked, moments of quiet struggle, and opportunities to offer kindness. He understood that even a simple gesture, a smile, or a small act of attention could transform someone's day, or even their life. When Saturday came again, Mark felt a sense of excitement that had grown into a quiet confidence. He knew the twins would be waiting, eager to play and communicate, ready to continue building the trust and connection they had begun. Each visit was a continuation of a journey that had started with a simple hello, but had grown into something extraordinary. A journey of empathy, understanding, and friendship that had the power to change lives. As he knelt near the twins and signed hello, Mark realized that he had witnessed something remarkable. Two children who had been invisible to the world were now seen, valued, and included. Their laughter, gestures, and smiles had become a bridge to connection, not only with Mark and Lily, but also with the community around them. It was a reminder that noticing, caring, and taking the time to understand could create profound and lasting change. For Mark, this journey had been transformative. He had started as a single dad seeking a way to connect with children in a park, but he had become a friend, a teacher, and an observer of quiet strength and resilience. The twins had taught him lessons in patience, empathy, and the power of small gestures, lessons that would stay with him for a lifetime. As the sun set that evening, Mark walked home with Lily, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and hope. The twins had found friendship, joy, and trust, and he had helped them take the first steps toward a world that recognized their worth. Mark smiled quietly, knowing that even a single act of noticing, a single gesture of kindness, could ripple outward and change lives in ways that words alone could never achieve. And so the park, once a place where the twins had been ignored, had become a space of laughter, learning, and connection. A simple hello had grown into friendship, trust, and understanding. And for Mark, Lily, and the twins, this was just the beginning of a journey that would continue to inspire, transform, and touch hearts for many Saturdays to come.